Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Mike Jacobs, founder and CEO of KitchData. KitchData offers medium and enterprise restaurants high quality virtual brands that are easy to serve. Mike, it's so exciting to jump on the show and chat with you. We were discussing some stuff around the landscape of ecosystem of startups, and I'm really excited to dive into what you're doing and what strategies you're deploying, growing your company, and what's pretty exciting and interesting about how brands like restaurants are really starting to transition and adopt this kind of virtual world and starting to connect, seeing that I think everyone craves from a consumer standpoint, a really connected brand experience, regardless of what it is. It's no longer clothes or social media. It's everything now. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started the company?
So actually, before I started this company, I had founded two other food tech startups. And after the exited from the second one, I had the opportunity to, in 2020, launch Dodger Dog Delivery in Los Angeles. So we opened up a little second generation restaurant on Sunset Boulevard and started serving Dodger dogs for the short season. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you the truth, it was a lot harder to do that than to launch a food tech startup
Yeah.
that had thousands of customers and hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of employees, right? So it's the hardest work I ever did in my
Really?
life was managing that restaurant and jumping into the line
Yeah.
during the Dodgers championship season in the playoffs when we turned the printer on for our service for dinner. And it was sort of like an episode of I Love Lucy.
Really?
The tickets would come out and there was no stopping the tickets. And we were all
Yeah.
staring like, is it gonna stop? And it never stopped. Actually, the roll would
Yeah.
end. And then we put a new roll of thermal paper into the printer and we'd do 300 orders in an hour or two. Right. So really, really hard business. And
Yeah.
to anybody that works on that side of the restaurant industry, I have to tip my hat because
Yeah.
it's really hard. It's rewarding. It's fulfilling, but
Yeah.
I don't think there's a job that's as hard as that in
Yeah.
the world, especially during a pandemic, right? So
Yeah. How would you say companies that or restaurants, how would they go and like overcome that hurdle of like high velocity, high volume? Obviously we see like In-N-Out's got this operational model. We can think about McDonald's in its early years. I just watched the Founder movie, which really kind of illuminated what their innovation was. But how do you overcome that when like human capital and time and all this stuff is fairly limited without,
at some point you can't.
yeah, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So in our case, it was 2020 COVID. We couldn't hire new people randomly to ramp
Yeah.
up just for the playoffs, right? Because of all the regulations, et cetera.
Yeah.
Actually kind of hard to do. And at some point we just had worst days or the best days sales wise, which is kind of both one and the same.
Yeah.
We'd
Yeah.
have a line of 50 Postmates couriers waiting for a bag of Dodger dogs, just because there were like 3 cooks in the kitchen. There's no more
Yeah.
space. Like you literally don't have space for another cook safely. And
Yeah.
then I was running Expo with one other person getting stuff out. Like we had a hot line, a cold line, and then 2 people running Expo. And I was during COVID. So I was the one that was typically handing the
Yeah.
bags to the Postmates couriers because I wasn't going to let someone
Yeah.
do that and not do it myself. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hardest day in my life was work-wise was the day before, like basically game 6 of the World Series
Yeah.
when they won, and we had like nearly 400 orders, and we're all like feeling like we're gonna have a heart attack.
Oh my goodness. Look, obviously it's also a problem, like a good problem to have, right? It's like that high velocity of orders, but what did you do well? Obviously Dodger Dog, you kind of already created this system to where people are going to order. You kind of created this confined experience, which totally makes sense. But for other companies or other restaurants out there, how do they create that traction and how are they doing it now?
Well, I think, what you touched upon in the introduction here is that the restaurant world is becoming virtual, right? And
Yeah.
digital. And in the kind of typical tech space, e-commerce, back in the early days of eBay and PayPal, I literally paid for college,
Yeah.
basically creating multiple accounts on eBay and Amazon, et cetera. Like one for books, one for sports
Yeah.
cards, one for like collectibles, like watches, one on and on and on. And each account did something a little bit different. And ultimately is all me, just as like a 18-year-old, like hustling, trying to make some money. But ultimately it worked a lot better when
Yeah.
the consumers knew what to expect from the account. And
Yeah.
you find that restaurants are doing the same thing now. So
Yeah.
over the course of the past couple months, the virtual restaurant industry has grown exponentially.
Yeah.
There's been some news about Uber shutting down
Yeah.
like 5,000 brands, but that was basically a little more than 10% of them that just weren't doing anything new or unique. And
Yeah.
it's easy to forget that this is also hospitality. And if you don't create a brand that puts a smile on someone's face, where they connect
Yeah.
with it, where, it evokes an emotion from them, the
Yeah.
brand shouldn't exist, right? That's
Yeah.
number one, because it's, even in the term virtual brand, it's still a brand. And a lot of the operators forgot about that in the rush to just get more screen space in the
Yeah.
aggregators like DoorDash and Uber Eats. And rightfully so, they shut down a lot of the brands that weren't really brands.
Right.
And so that's
Right.
number one. Number two, you mentioned the founder. What they did really well in the early days of McDonald's was they created a method
Yeah.
for, and I hate to use the word easy because it's not easy, but for easily replicating the same burger in New York as they do in LA.
Right.
And
Right.
if you're going to create a food brand, that component has to be key to your plans, right? And
Yeah.
to date, there haven't been a lot of the virtual brand companies that can even considered that, right? They'll create a recipe, et cetera, but they don't really operate a supply chain, very well, because
Yeah.
to a lot of people, supply chain isn't a sexy business, but we all saw also during COVID that it's a very important business. If the
Yeah.
supply chain doesn't work, nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there are times where we didn't even have food in the grocery stores in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No, I remember those times, and it's so fascinating. Just also thinking about restaurants, and remind me, is it mainly is it small restaurants, medium restaurants? Describe the profile of customers that you are currently serving.
So currently we're working with a lot of mid-market restaurants that have maybe like 5 to 25 locations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we help them on the supply chain side. We have a method for improving basically the cost of everything that they're purchasing,
Yeah.
getting them a better deal with our economies of scale. We also have a method with some equipment and some policies, procedures for basically installing a new virtual brand machine
Yeah.
of which we're in the process of launching some pretty cool virtual brands with some great partners who have CPG companies with excellent products, et cetera.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to announce some of those hopefully in the next 30 to 60 days. And they're very excited, but obviously you don't announce them before there's a deal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we have to get to the deal. And with those, we're launching them initially with some of the enterprise players in
Yeah.
the restaurant space.
Yeah. And what made you focus? What inspired you to focus on these type of restaurants? I'm sure there's a particular profile. I'm sure individuals who've grown restaurants before, they maybe have multiple locations, and they're fairly good at doing that component, growing restaurants. But what in particular inspired you to start helping them essentially connect better or more in a more modern experience with their consumers?
Well, that part was a little bit of trial and not really error, but trial.
Yeah.
And we've worked with small, medium, and large businesses. Right now, we have the ability to help medium and large businesses
Yeah.
more substantially, right?
Yeah.
So the small businesses, with some of the other projects that we've done, ultimately there's a cost associated with
Yeah.
some of the equipment that they need to purchase, et cetera. It's just not the best fit for them.
Sure.
And then,
Sure.
and then also from the supply chain perspective, you also need to work with clients that the distributors
Yeah.
are comfortable spending time and resources on initially. So
Yeah.
ultimately, it has to be sort of like a top-down approach where we're working with the medium and large clients, and then as we scale, we'll reactivate our small business
Yeah.
outreach, which was actually quite successful. We
Yeah.
launched a couple hundred locations across the country in a little less than a year once we launch.
Yeah. But so it's awesome thinking about tackling even just the medium to even some enterprise restaurant chains and thinking about, I was talking to my business partner and I was traveling. I can't remember what state I was in, but it was hard to find the right food that I wanted. I ended up going to something I just knew. And I was talking to him about the value of just having that consistent experience in other locations. It helps people kind of still connect, still be able to feel that they can kind of eat and feel satiated, have this experience, but traveling, go to different places. How are brands doing that before in the way that they were being consistent outside of their menu and experience internally, like connecting with it on a digital, I guess, in a digital space? How do you do it right?
So, and that's a great question. Some of the big players do it right all the time. Like
Yeah.
if you go to cloud kitchens in LA, you'll see that there's companies like Chick-fil-A in there, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you'll see that they've been able to replicate a Chick-fil-A kitchen in the cloud kitchen, and it could even be relatively close to just a brick and mortar store. But the reason why they expanded their digital footprint in that location was to fill capacity. So you'll hear a lot of people in the space talk about excess capacity. That's a company that actually doesn't have enough capacity because
Yeah.
they'll have the two QSRs that really stand out there are in this area are Chick-fil-A and In-N-Out, where you'll have a line of cars around the block waiting for the drive-through. So
Yeah.
when they launch a new location and put it on the digital channels, it does extremely well, right?
Right.
So they've already built a brand. They already know what the consumer demand is. They already have par levels. They already know how to staff everything.
Yeah.
And when they have a great like learning management system and human capital like development system where
Yeah.
the digital ends up being an extension of everything else.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in this industry, especially in the past couple of years, while these virtual concepts have scaled from maybe around 100, 200 locations nationwide, when I came up with a concept that later became called Nextbite, is up to like 40, 50, 60,000 locations. Now is a lot of these players only created digital presence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's a hollow experience. It doesn't, like if you talk to some of the mom and pop operators, they'll say that there's no soul to it. And what they
Sure.
mean from like a tactile experience, what they're feeling is that they don't understand the brand that's been created to meet that digital experience, and they don't see it. And a lot of those brands are really just filling up screen space, which ultimately is the reason, in my opinion, why Uber and DoorDash removed a good percentage of these brands from their properties, because they're ultimately about creating a great experience as well.
Yeah.
And all of the brands on their platform really have to mean something.
Yeah. And thinking about when you create that brand or that experience, where do you focus on? Do you focus on, for restaurants in particular, is it a type of food? Is it a type of mantra? What in particular, when you get to that medium size level, do you see a lot of brands focusing on? Is it something that they're receiving from their consumer? How are they kind of gathering the right information to build that right brand? Because I think we've seen time and time again, brands come out and just miss. And I'm thinking about like, just like completely misassociated with their brand and image. And sometimes it works because it's so off, but a lot of times it doesn't work at all. What are they gathering? What signals are they gathering to create that brand experience?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good successes, and so I'll focus on a couple of those. That, one of them that I like is a company called Big Chicken with Shaq. Right. So, but he calls it Big Chicken. He created a brand. They worked really hard, created a brand and experience. There's a brick and mortar and a great menu. The food's good too. But you don't have to be an NBA fan or a Shaq fan to see a Big Chicken and say, oh, I could get a good chicken sandwich here. Let me try it.
Yeah.
But they'll still have a poster of Shaq somewhere out, like outside of the of the restaurant, not even in it. Like the one that's closest to my house in Hollywood is they actually, last time I was there, they had a Shack poster on the bus stop in front of the QSR, in front of the restaurant. It was super creative and a little bit of tongue in cheek, and the irreverence there doesn't get lost on the people who are like NBA or Shack fans, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
sense of humor.
Yeah, it works because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it offers some kind of like legitimacy, right? If somebody who has their own brand endorses it, then it creates this connection. It's almost like there's more at stake for this not to be a good experience, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Another earlier example, also in basketball, was Blaze Pizza. Well, LeBron sold his stake for the, I believe it was still very successful, scaled very quickly, and is still a great brand with or without him, right?
Yeah.
Because they built a foundation and the consumers know what to expect. And just like you were saying, and if you don't know what to expect from a brand, there's no reason really for it to be there.
Yeah. What are some recent maybe technological developments or operational developments that are now allowing these companies to get off platforms like DoorDash and aggregate platforms that kind of put them against other restaurants similar or like, or even just in this big pool, versus now it seems like it's almost easier to find them on Google. It's almost easier to order from them online or go and understand their experience. Is this a technology is this a standard of the industry pushing in this direction? All the above? Or what in particular kind of was a catalyst to start moving a more modern direction and start taking some of that consumerism back?
Well, I think it's actually the economy souring, to tell you the truth, right? So people are more price sensitive now than they were a couple of years ago. So if they know that the pizza that they're ordering is $2 or $3 cheaper, ordering it from the company's website.
I just had a conversation. I just had a conversation with my partner. It's such a triggering moment because we were like, well, there's the fees, and then obviously trying to get straight connected. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the reason why consumers love the experience of DoorDash and Uber Eats and being able to browse and explore and learn what's around them. But ultimately, whenever you add another party in, it has to be more expensive. And I'm a big fan of Uber and DoorDash. I think they do a great job, but the consumers themselves they're just more price sensitive now. So you'll see that the white labels at restaurants operate, or even Google ordering, which is pretty cool actually. They've really done some good work there in the past year or two that can work. And ultimately, Google can sit there as the number 3 player in the space if they felt like it, quietly and not spend many resources on it, and do a great job for the restaurants.
What would you do if you were a company like DoorDash or Uber? I mean, obviously there's going to be a growing frustration with having to pay an additional cost just for the experience. And it might even affect the brands that are on the platform a little bit more, being that people are not choosing them because of that increased cost association. I mean, what would you do if you're a brand like that? How would you shift your focus to then think about this more as more as a megaphone for restaurants versus a way to transact quickly?
Yeah, I was with one of the founders of DoorDash last year, actually. And I don't think they understood why they won LA and Chicago, et cetera. So in LA, there was a company that I founded with a couple of people here called Ordermark, which later became Nextbite. And then in Chicago, there was a company called Chowly, which did nearly the same thing, right? Where we were able to onboard every restaurant in a geography that took online ordering and delivery seriously, to DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats, Postmates, et cetera, right? So we would onboard them to about 7 or 8 different platforms. And ultimately, like, there was 1 or 2 months where I signed the paperwork for about 450 restaurants to go onto DoorDash. And in LA, right? Just in LA. And the rate that the restaurants were paying for DoorDash was about 15%. The rate that the restaurants were paying for the other players in the space was about 25 to 30% already.
Wow.
So when I would go to the restaurants later to just say hi, et cetera, you better believe there was a little DoorDash decal in their window and a little order on DoorDash card, because DoorDash would send the discount cards, and the other companies weren't there. When we started, DoorDash was at about 4.5, 4.7% of the LA market. And they're much, much, much more than that at the moment, right? Yeah. So right now we have another kind of inflection point for those players in the industry. The winner is going to be the one that's most affordable for restaurants.
Yeah.
And it's a hard decision to make. Like if you ask the executive team from DoorDash or Uber, like from strategically, right? So they know that if they want to win, they have to, in the restaurant space, they're going to have to be the most affordable one, because they definitely know that as well, right? Yeah. And because what we did in LA, Charlie did in Chicago with Sterling over there. And there were a couple other players in the space as well, like at the Checkmate in New York, et cetera. Yeah. And ultimately everybody did the same thing. Yeah. And the results were the same everywhere. Yeah. So all the executive teams know this, but sometimes they could be okay being number 2 in the market. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it just depends at this point where they want to go.
Yeah. Well said. And shifting focus, obviously, to KitchData, what's been exciting about the traction you've seen up to this point, and what in particular are you excited about in terms of the next milestone you're looking to achieve with the company?
So we just have some really exciting brands with amazing partners. We're in proposal to launch a brand with what's essentially the number 1 media company in the United States with their talent, and one of the largest restaurant groups in the United States. And I couldn't be more excited and proud for everybody that's involved, as well as just looking forward for the experience that the gentleman from that company can create for our enterprise partner. Yeah. And if you want, we can circle back in about a month and I'll be able to say who it is, but it's just, to me, it's the coolest thing ever. And I've been a fan of those gentlemen and the entity they work with basically my entire life. And, right. So it's almost like being a kid in the candy store at that point.
Yeah. And in thinking about whether it's external or internal, what do you view as some of the biggest risks that the company faces today?
Well, the economy is a risk, right? So when at this point, we're assuming there's no funding money at all, ever. Sure. Right. And we're operating in a cash flow positive manner because we have to. Yeah. And that does slow growth a little bit. Right. But what I've found, and a lot of other founders have found, is that the real winners in tech and in these spaces end up being kind of the turtles that go just slow. And then eventually you look up and somehow that turtle's a very big business 5-10 years later. The people who end up failing in this type of economy, they haven't adapted, and the type of business acumen that's necessary right now is much different. You have to have a much stronger business acumen. You can't commit to anything that's extraneous, that doesn't generate positive returns for you and your team in the near term. Yeah. Right? But you still have to have a long-term vision and plan. And that's what makes it really hard. And the growth at all cost mentality is gone.
Yeah.
And then it'll come back at some point, but it might take a few years. And I think what we'll find is a lot of the biggest companies 10 years from now will have been born as a startup about now, or will have survived and changed substantially because of the economy right now.
Yeah, I agree with many things you said, in particular, like the business acumen piece, because you see a lot more mature, younger companies, and I'm talking about the way they operate, how they structure, even like their cultural values, their onboarding process. It's like everything is under a microscope to be able to be productive and efficient, that's why procurement companies are so valuable now, procurement tech, because everyone's thinking about where they're spending their dollars. And it's cool to see. I mean, I'm sure as a founder yourself, you're like, it's really exciting to see these really sophisticated, well-operated businesses and how they're able to deploy tactics or strategies that it's just unseen and are really around incentives. Because like, if you're not making everybody happy, unfortunately, all your stakeholders, you can't grow. You can't grow. You're gonna have a lot of resistance. Yeah.
No, and I agree about the procurement tech, and it's really just business in general, even in the startup space, has really evolved at this point to focus on the bottom line.
Yeah.
As the key indicator for success. And there's a reason. In the restaurant industry is an old school business, has always been that way. You could never launch a successful restaurant avoiding paying great detail to the bottom line. And the reason being is for every dollar in efficiency you find on the bottom line is worth $10 to $20, depending on the restaurant, in top line sales. Yeah. So if you're, as a business, spending, let's say 30% more for your cost of goods sold than your enterprise, for instance, clients, in this economy, the chance of you being successful is bleak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I'd agree
so
with
the
that.
first thing, so the first thing you have to do is find a company like KitchData that can help you fix that.
Yeah.
It's the product that we have that we're just launching now that accomplishes that for the mid-market chains. It took 2 years to develop. It was much harder than building my last company's tech product and getting it to over 1,000 locations. I'd say it took just as much time to create it and launch the first 8 locations as it did for the other one to create it and launch well over 1,000 locations.
Yeah.
More time, more resources, but ultimately I think it's, in this economy, just as valuable as the other one was back in the day, where top line from online ordering was key because everybody was just proving that it could generate revenue and it was a future revenue bucket. And even the bottom line wasn't such a big deal when it was, let's say, 5 to 10% of a restaurant's revenue. It was more just, we better create this presence so that when it becomes a greater percentage of our revenue, we have it, and then we'll work on the bottom line later because it's only 5%. Yeah. So that's the other side of the coin from a question you asked a little while ago about Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats, right? So
yeah. And what was, I guess, the more challenging bit about this product in particular? Was it the technology? Was it as thinking about the variables that you have to consider? What in particular made it a little bit more of a or even, I guess, not a slower build, but one that had a lot of intention? It seems like that was kind of a big theme for what you were doing. Yeah. What was the cause of that?
So when I started, I didn't think about it this way, but when you listen to Jeff Bezos's interviews about why he picked book SKUs for the early days of Amazon, it's because it was the hardest thing to do. Yeah. So I would disagree with that and say, look at broadline distributors' SKUs and see how many SKUs they have. And when you see the 100th Parmesan cheese SKU, you'll realize that the food industry might be a little more complex. Yeah. Right. So it's very difficult to get that right. And then you have old school businesses that have to be super risk adverse, because if they make a mistake with their purchasing, even if they're a 50-plus-year-old restaurant, they could be out of business within 2 months.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the worst thing they can ever do is launch some sort of program for their purchasing that locks them in to rates that are too high for them, right? So if they spend a little bit extra money, like if their margins are, let's say 5-7%, and everything ends up costing 5% more, they're literally putting themselves out of business.
Yeah.
Right. So very, very difficult, just from the business perspective, but also from the operations and the technology perspectives, because everything has to be perfect and it couldn't be more complicated.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see the amount of investment needing to just like not only capture the amount of data, categorize it, but also to figure out ways to deliver value. And I'm sure give your consumers almost immediate results. I don't know if you've read like the $100 million Offer is like a really popular book right now. And But a really cool part of their philosophy, the authors, is that the ability to deliver results in 2 weeks and how much stronger that is. But a lot of the work to do that is done on the back end when you're developing the product, answering the
2
questions.
years
right?
ahead of time.
Yeah.
And anytime I've tried to do stuff where we didn't deliver within a month, forget about 2 weeks, but within a month, it just doesn't work out the way you would expect. Even if you can launch something in 2 weeks and it should work, if it doesn't work for whatever reason, even if it's not your fault, you typically don't have a second chance of business, right? You have to find a new partner, right? So
Right.
it's very rare where someone will give you another chance, even as a startup. And even if it was a third party that caused whatever snafu it is, it really doesn't matter. People move forward.
Right. Yeah. I love this next section. I call my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we go. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. I always like to open it up with this one. What's particularly hard about your job day to day?
I would say I love this, but most people would hate it. Every single meeting, every single thing that I'm doing day to day is completely different. And it's very hard to draw the line between all of them and point it north, right? If you're managing 10 different functions in 20 different ways and pointing the ship north, that's the hardest part.
Yeah. And thinking about what you spend your time on, founders talk a lot about just what they would like to prioritize on. What's something that you spend a lot of time on that you would like to decrease the amount of time you spend on it, and something that you spend little on that you would like to spend more on?
So I don't think I spend enough time on business development, right?
Yeah.
So it's always the number one job of any founder is business development, no matter what you call it. It could be fundraising, it could be sales, it could be partnerships, right? So that type of business development should and is be and always is the number one project. Now, lately I've been spending more time on specific operations, and hopefully at some point we'll get to the juncture where I can hire someone to replace me. We're interviewing them. That'll be great. And they'll do a much better job than I will. You never really want the founder type guys doing very specific things. No matter what the founders say, is we're usually nowhere near as good at that as people who are more detail and focused oriented. And we tend to be more theorists in general, and it's hard for us, but any good founder can step in the line, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're grilling hot dogs or, which I was literally doing a couple of years ago, or before that, changing the restaurant industry, making really easy for everyone to activate an online business, which was the goal for Ordermark. And what we're doing here, which is making it really easy for anybody to open a second online business, right? With our new products and technologies that we're leveraging for our process for virtual grants, right? So that's just really cool. And what I've spent the least amount of time on now, which I should spend more time on since we're still early stages, is on the vision area. But with the real work that needs to get done day to day, it's kind of hard to justify taking some time off to wax poetic, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So,
one thing we didn't touch upon that was interesting about your background is that you spent some time at the FBI. And one thing that really caught my attention, obviously, like that's super interesting as a founder, anytime you hear that, but also thinking about data. You mentioned something about data in the pre-show notes, and I was so curious on what is your vantage point of data? What essentially did you take away from that experience, and how do you view data nowadays that maybe some people don't?
Well, thankfully I wasn't doing the data so much. I was more over there. There were some cases where it was necessary, but any data that I had, the main thing I learned is, I don't know if you ever read anything like by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or anything like that.
No, nothing yet. No.
Sherlock Holmes or the Hardy Boys. Or
yes.
Like
Yeah. I have.
So, so whatever you have in front of you data-wise is never the finished product. Yeah. There's a major difference between data and intelligence. And if you're trying to figure out what happened or what will happen, you have to be able to take that information and I like to call it like a snowball effect and roll it down a hill and let it grow.
Yeah.
And you can figure out where everything's going pretty quickly. But if you take everything at face value, you'll never get there.
Yeah. 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 And I can see how it obviously helps in startup land in regards to thinking about the direction of a product. I was just talking to my business partner about this. We're launching a new product, and it seems like the closer you get to the idea and you start to pick up these signals, start to have customer interviews, start all these little decisions, and you start to kind of create these little points, little milestones, it does kind of finally start to roll downhill and start to make sense because the narrative there, the stories there behind it. And I'm curious how, obviously, thinking about how you motivate teams as a founder, and a lot of founders have a struggle with that. What is the narrative or the cultural value? What is something that you kind of maintain that helps you keep the team in the right trajectory?
Well, for us, we're in the restaurant and hospitality industry, and we're really focused. Like, we don't own any of the brands that we're working with. It's all our clients, but we're helping them create an experience.
Yeah.
And if the brand can't evoke an experience, like an emotional response, which is hopefully positive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then it's not ready.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, like, if you're Mr. Beast or if you're some of the people that we're working with right now. It's one of my favorite clients is Ric Flair, who's right. So we have a wing restaurant with them, and we're just starting to market it. It has around 50 locations, right? So, but he has a real brand. It exists. It evokes a response. People smile. And then when they see the video of Rick holding the wings, screaming like, woo, it really gets a response. And guess what? Late night, people buy Woo wings. So it's a great late night brand. So if the restaurant, the partner that we're working with has it available between 10 and 2, and if we're marketing it in the geography, his results are amazing. Sales wise, it's literally every dollar spent results in multiples upon multiples of sales because it's a great brand. People know what to expect. And then as long as the food gets delivered in a manner where it's good, which it should always happen, then the experience is fulfilled for the customer. And for us, we just have to remember that we're in the hospitality industry, and we have to create positive response. And the end result, it's kind of one of the most similar companies, I think, ironically, is like an Airbnb, right? So even though Brian and the team don't own or operate any of the rooms that are on their site, they have a method and they have a system for delivering something that's consistently to the buyer's expectations. And that's the number one thing that I think a lot of the early companies in this virtual restaurant space really didn't put an emphasis on as it was growing and as it was scaling, and everybody was trying to be open. They were trying to open 700 locations a month, et cetera. And in all honesty, that has never worked in the entire history of food and beverage, and it never will. Right. Like if McDonald's could open up 700 new locations a month, they definitely would. As would Domino's, et cetera. But if they can't do it, there's reason to believe that a startup will not be able to do that.
I know we're coming to the end of the show here, and I always like to ask this question before we leave. What's a book or an individual who impacted you a lot? Anything that they've kind of, whether it's early in your career or now, left with you, and then something you would like to share?
So early in my career, I was basically a sociologist, right? So I was teaching sociology classes at the University of Arizona, and professor there who just retired, his name was Al Bergeson. Al ran the sociology department there for decades, and really interesting, fun guy, but also very smart. So some of the stuff that he worked on was more on the culture side in that he did cultural sociology. So when you're building a brand, the most important thing that you could ever do is take the brand and create, I know it sounds geeky, but define a set of variables and that are very specific in operations management, et cetera. They might call them KPIs and OKRs.
Yeah.
But as far as this goes for the brand, you have to define what you're expecting to do and why it's important. And then you have to run it by people who aren't your friends, who aren't anything like that. And see if how you're defining your brand and what you're doing resonates with them based on those variables, right? So it could be, other people might call it like some sort of customer satisfaction index, whatever.
Yeah.
But from an early stage startup, that's total BS. You, as a founder, you kind of have to just create the principles, create the brand, and then you have to go and look people in the eye and see how they react. And you have to be able to decode whether or not you've evoked an emotional response, if you've done something memorable. And if you haven't done something memorable, and you can't write down what you did that was memorable or why. Like when I'm talking to you, I know that the Ric Flair wings brand was memorable.
Right. Yeah.
And I saw that same look on a good percentage of the people who were asked about this brand's faces, right?
Yeah.
And it's a look of surprise and interest.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to understand that. So if you saw that online, you might give it a try. And there's a very specific demographic that orders. It's almost exclusively male. And then you have a group that knows the rap song, who are younger. And then a group that knows him as a wrestler that are 40 plus. So you have those two groups. And they're both customers for him. Right?
Fascinating.
And you see the same response from both groups when you bring up the brand and you talk about it. And with a little bit of work, pretty much anybody could think about their brand in that way and test it. Not even customers, just people in the demographic. And then understand what the likelihood is that that person might become one of your customers. And I've seen companies blow through tens to hundreds of millions of dollars and not do that once in this space, right? So to just take a step back and do the TLER from that is the real lesson is really just to create some sort of measurable result to determine the potential impact that your brand could have on not just in general, but on the culture. Right. And any brand that you have operates within that culture. So if you can't predict who's going to care, you don't have a business.
Right. Yeah. Mike, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, not only learning about your early career, but also what you're working on at KitchData, how you view not only startups in the startup space, but the evolution of them. It's been such a pleasure going through this discussion with you. But last little bit is, where can we find you and be a fan? Give us your LinkedIns, your Twitters. Where can we be a fan of Mike Jacobs and what you're building?
Just search for me on LinkedIn. I'm typically there. It's just Mike Jacobs, KDS. It should be pretty available there. And then and my email, phone number, et cetera, is on there. Fairly open book. Just don't expect me to answer it. I don't know why. But please reach out.
Absolutely. Mike, it's been such a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you again for being on Behind Company Lines today.
No, thank you, Julian.
Of course.